And we're good to go. Okay, now we're gonna start, session 5. This session is about short-term rent, mortgage, and utility assistance and permanent housing and placement. We did not finish, the rest of the slides for TVRA, but we are gonna finish that before we head up to end. So this is gonna look similar to the TVRA presentation, but we're focusing more on specific hotspots. We're gonna provide an overview about STRMU and PHP and look at hotspots for both HOPWA funded activities. You know, one of the cool things about STRMU is that the eligible costs part of STRMU is right in the acronym, rent or utility. So again, this is definitely the eligibility, except for housing information services to be eligible for HOPWA.
Even when that client calls saying, I'm gonna be evicted in 12 minutes unless you cut me a check.
Yeah.
STRMU.
At least one family member must have a diagnosis of HIV/AIDS, it can include a minor, and total gross annual income of all family members cannot exceed 80% AMI. STRMU is definitely a type of homeless prevention assistance. It's meant to be used to prevent homelessness. It's meant to be a short-term stabilizing intervention. It's not meant to be used on an ongoing basis. And it's meant to stabilize housing if a HOPWA eligible household has a financial crisis related to their HIV/AIDS diagnosis or a change in economic circumstances. So loss of income, reduction of income, somebody moves out of the household who had income and now the household doesn't have income. Or things like extraordinary medical expenses, things like that. STRMU cannot be used for those who are currently homeless. So they have to be currently housed in a unit. Assistance is short-term. Assistance is capped at 21 weeks in any 52-week period. Eligible costs, current, past due, rent, mortgage, utility. And then like everything else we've been talking about, staff salary and fringe for program staff doing anything related to STRMU or touching delivering STRMU, and overhead costs associated with that activity. There are 3 eligibility criteria for STRMU because STRMU is the one activity that's needs-based in the HOPWA program. So first, they have to meet the 2 basic eligibility criteria. They need to have legal residency in housing or a responsibility to make utility payments, and the household must demonstrate a need for assistance. Steve, do you want to talk about demonstrating a need for assistance? Or we might do that on the next slide. I can't remember. Okay.
I think it's in there. Let's jump into it.
So HOPWA eligibility. This is also a repeat of what we talked about under tenant-based rental assistance. Remember, you have to verify income eligibility, right? So that means you need to collect documentation from all household members who are saying they have a source of income. Refusal to provide income documentation means you can't determine eligibility, means you can't determine if somebody's can receive STRMU. So you have to have those things to be able to figure out if somebody's even eligible in the first place.
But that also means you can't prorate it.
Right.
So sometimes we see programs say husband and wife will provide income, husband won't, will cover half of rent or half of the mortgage. So the family is ineligible for HOPWA because they did not provide income assistance. Some other federal programs, I think, allow a proration based upon who submits what, but that's not true for HOPWA.
because they're residing all together as a family, right? You're assisting the family. Documentation of need. Households must demonstrate need for assistance. This can include documentation supporting some of these examples that we included above, like lack of financial resources to pay for rent, mortgage, and utilities. Could be unexpected medical bills, reduced income, loss of income, unexpected home repairs for homeowners, right? Say somebody, because you can use it for utility assistance or mortgage, right? Say they're living in their home, they had this unexpected repair, and they're having difficulty now paying their mortgage. That's a financial crisis. Increased utility expenses, especially during like wintertime heating costs, or if you're living in an area where it's really hot in the summer and they have high cooling costs.
So for that one, for people on fixed income, would it be appropriate to approve that from like normally they're in like some type of like in a lease, so they had that house, let's say a year. I can show like last year's cost for this year, because that's what happened to all my STRMU funds last year. Utilities costs went up so much for the fixed income people that they couldn't.
Yeah, and in addition to showing their fixed income can't support the increased cost,
Yeah, because
you-
you show it on the.
you
bill.
could. But yeah, you could, absolutely, yeah, and document that in case notes and, yep. One thing about, documentation of need, demonstration of need, HOPWA regulations don't require that you wait until a household receives a notice to vacate or eviction notice or a shut-off notice for utilities or even a foreclosure letter. You can use that type of documentation, right? If the client has it and they didn't come in sooner, right? And they're just coming in all of a sudden with this emergency. Certainly use it if they have it, but you don't need to say, I can't help you now, wait till you get a notice to vacate. Actually, don't do that. And
Particularly
all,
in these tight rental markets, but
Yeah.
not to that point, it's already gonna damage their history, some of the other things could damage their credit. So if it's not a requirement, why wait until the damage is done?
make sure, any supporting documentation that you have, you know, if it's a hard copy that the client has and they want back, just photocopy it and keep it in the client file along with that specific request for that assistance that you provided. Because it's sort of like all one package, it goes together. So you're approving this one-time or two-time amount for mortgage, and there are expenses and costs related to that instance. Keep all of that together.
Yeah, wait, it's like a.
Yeah. So it tells a story. A word about legal right to reside in a unit or pay utilities. Households must provide supporting documentation. They have a legal right to reside in the unit or evidence of being responsible for pay for rent, mortgage, and utilities. This just simply means that if somebody is living with somebody else and they're living with a household, and the utilities are in another household member's name, it doesn't have to be in the HOPWA eligible individual's name for you to help with utilities. In fact, utilities could be in the name of somebody else, not even living in the family, because sometimes people have difficulty getting utilities in their name for bad credit, past due, poor history of making payments. As long as they can provide some documentation that shows, yes, the utilities are associated with the unit they are living in, and they do pay that. The same with mortgage and the same with rent, same concepts.
So if somebody is on getting CVRA and they're getting an allowance for utilities and their utility bill goes up exponentially, as all parts have, check off will cover the extra expense?
Nope.
Okay.
No. Why?
Because they're in subsidy, so they're having a subsidized apartment already.
Because they're already currently subsidized with tenant-based rental assistance. So that would be duplication of cost, duplication of assistance. You might be able to access some other sources right? Yeah, like unrestricted funding that could be used to help in situations like that, but you can't use like resources to pay for that same cost.
I have a question. Apologize if you've already addressed this. What about the old utility bill
From,
from 2 years ago? That, and you're trying to, right? You had that?
Yeah, I can pay. So.
in the current unit or a prior unit, and they're trying to
Prior
move in.
unit, Could be a prior unit.
The prior unit would be paid with permanent housing.
PHP,
Yeah, and then the current unit would be paid with STRMU.
Okay.
STRMU counts days, so the actual days, the unit, the people were in that unit, I can pay 147 days. That's why I remember I say I have to have that bill with the circle that has the days, because I can pay that many days,
basically STRMU.
but not for anybody else.
The only time you would pay for past due utilities with STRMU if it's related to the unit they're living in currently. PHP could be used to pay for utilities of a unit they used to live in, but they're trying to move into a new unit. Maybe they're homeless or they're couch surfing or staying with family, and they have to pay off that utility bill to access new housing, and not paying that is a barrier to them getting utilities in their name or accessing a new resident. So that's when you would use PHP.
So just a little bit of documentation on that. So let's say I have a client, I move them into the new place, they have a bill, they transfer that to their new bill, right? It's on their new bill, but it says prior bill. I could just highlight that and say, we're paying this part with permanent housing, this part with STRMU, and probably a deposit in there too, that would be, I could just separate that, correct?
If the documentation's clear that part of that bill is for a previous
Yeah,
unit,
because it will say it's.
you would use the exact same documentation for the,
But it would have to be because it,
is a barrier.
right, if it's not a barrier for
Well,
them
yeah,
to
it
get
wouldn't
it.
turn
Okay.
it on if I did.
There you go,
Pledge
yes,
was to put it on.
yes, just make sure you have that in there. Yeah, you had to do that because they wouldn't have even been able to move into the new unit, right?
I wanted to do the legal right to reside in the unit. That also clearly doesn't say lease. So in a lot of situations, the lease will be the easiest form to show someone has a legal right to reside, but it does not have to be. Right, particularly if someone lived in a unit for an eternity, right? You don't have to have a lease. So we would have a form that we have landlords fill out. If someone says, I don't have a lease, I've lived here since the beginning of time. We, all right, we need a landlord to fill this out, confirming that you have the legal right to reside in your home.
Yeah.
So also leases don't have to be a barrier for service.
And then if it's in somebody else's name, you can just get that person's ID and say they're responsible for this.
You just need documentation supporting that they are an occupant,
And then say.
they
it's
can
the other-
live in the unit, and they have been contributing and paying for, right? Yep. Duplication of assistance, duplication of benefits, right? If somebody's getting HOPWA TDRA, housing choice voucher, living in public housing, another state, COC, rental assistance, you can't use STRMU.
I do have a question for that.
Yep.
I have a client that if I didn't know the situation in full, I would say that he pays his home rent himself.
Mhm.
Because it's a DB client and the DB. And
Okay.
I know that because I put him in the DB place and I was very happy with it. Is that subsidized? Do I know that? Or is that confidential and I could use, because it's private?
Well,
Right?
no, it's not necessarily, it wouldn't be confidential, especially if you have a release of information.
Right, I mean,
You
yeah,
need to contact the agency that's helping with the rent
right,
to say, is he subsidized? What we mean by having rental assistance and subsidized is that in this situation, does that client, is he or she or they, are they paying a portion, right? Do they have their portion of rent calculated like they have rental assistance? So that would be one of the key
And if they
elements.
say yes, they do,
Then
then
that
I
would,
couldn't pay.
right, right. Mhm. And here's a list of a bunch of ineligible costs: moving assistance, security deposit, first month's rent, down payment, household supplies, transportation.
The one to pull out here is pretty that last one about household supplies, furnishings and all of that. Because that's where programs will go down this rabbit hole in their heads and say, well, they need rent to stay out, but they're also not gonna stay in the unit unless they have a bed. So it's homeless prevention to buy them a bed, right? So as Heather said, the eligible costs are in,
The acronym.
don't get caught up in that like,
I
that
don't
case
know,
where they're
not
calling,
saying
oh,
this.
well, as long as we're keeping you in your unit, we're gonna do X, Y, Z.
And remember too, when we're talking about utilities, we're talking about heat, hot water, sewer, electricity.
Not trash.
No? Well,
That's the only thing I got in trouble for forever.
What if it's a condition of the landlord that you get trash for their event?
I'd lean toward, yeah.
I
Yeah.
almost said yeah, because I mean.
Trash is actually a utility. Trash is a utility. If somebody's on tenant-based, if somebody's on tenant-based rental assistance and they are responsible for trash, like in Maine, we have to buy bags.
Right.
They have an apartment building. There isn't a dumpster for the apartment building. They have to buy bags and put bags out. You need to give them a utility allowance for trash because they're buying bags, for example. Or if they have to go to the dump and pay something, are there dumps like that anymore?
What if the building they live in don't offer mail and they have to pay for their PO box?
No.
I can't pay for a PO
No.
box?
It's
Not
not
with
a
Aqua.
necessary utility for that unit to be safe.
That's not a utility.
Anyway. I mean, not in.
That's not a utility.
Not in STRMU, but for like doctor's appointments and stuff, they have to be able to get their mail if they don't have a phone. I'm just trying to do that.
No.
Okay.
PO box.
Let me maybe stop you. So there is a city that charges a city fee to its residents in order to reside there. That covers their sewer, it covers maybe trash, and then maybe some utility that's not really a utility. How would they do that? Would they just split it thirds? Would it be?
I would ask your local housing authority what they do.
Okay.
Or did you just, were you referring to a municipal fees?
Yeah, like a city fee,
I think Dunmore has that, they have. a
Yeah, like
municipal fee,
municipal
like-
So the landlord would pass that on to the tenant?
Yeah.
I would ask, well, that's a different discussion
Okay.
because that, well, if you're talking TVRA, you could do that a different way.
Yeah.
But if you're talking STRMU, then you might want to think something else. But then it would still be worth checking to see what your housing authority does.
Okay.
Absolutely check what they did.
Maybe just.
Yep.
I think
PO box? No.
not, and I can't make a reasonable accommodation because that's how they get their doctor's.
No,
appointments.
there's no place to
Or
put
their,
that.
or their medication gets up to them.
This is a housing activity, so it's a necessary utilities. right?
Remember, we're talking utilities.
Right.
Yeah, well, I'm not, maybe just not STRMU.
You mean like supportive services? No.
I tried everything.
Oh, I get it.
But you have to pay monthly and I don't,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't pay monthly.
Yeah.
So if we get to support service, we can also talk about creative ways to use support service dollars to fund things that are allowable, so clients can pay for things that are unallowable.
So
So I can give them like a gift card?
for food, and then they could use the money to pay for the PO box. Just offset their costs someplace else. So you might think the need is the PO box, right? You might think the need, the obvious is the PO box, but you're like, you need help with food, right? Yeah. Now you got money to pay your PO box.
But if you think
Flip
about
it.
it, that same principle is documentation of need. The
Right.
need that someone has is the unexpected medical bill, $800 car repair.
Right.
HOPWA can't pay for those, so what you did was pay an eligible cost, rent or mortgage,
Right.
and then they paid for that.
Right.
So you're just using HOPWA funds for eligible expenses, so they can cover other necessary things.
Right.
They're reasonable, right? Because what we did talk about, because everyone's good at, is the unnecessary stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we used to have a client in Maine that would spend all of their money on Christmas parties every year.
Every
God
year.
bless him, he would submit a STRMU application, he was totally honest, and every year we denied it. Said, that's great that you spent money on food and gifts, but that is not a good use of your funds, we're denying it. I said, but otherwise, it'd be like, I need help fixing my car, I can't get to work, I can't get to the doctor, said, we can't pay for that, however, I see you have January rent coming up, I think you need help with rent, let's put in a rent application.
Yeah, and then, so then I would just add like their tire receipt to the rent application because they need the tires to get back and forth.
Right, they had an unexpected expense that supports that they need help paying the rent because they need their car to go to work or to go to the doctors to take their meds to access, right, exactly. You just kind of yeah.
So it's that creative
just
engagement
dig,
and
dig, dig, dig.
and learning what's an eligible cost. And that's what we would assist.
Right.
But he's in. Oh, that's right.
Inspections, HOPWA habitability and housing quality standards do not apply to STRMU. There is no regulatory requirement to do an inspection for STRMU. But you should, as part of your intake and application, ask some habitability type questions about the condition of the unit. Do you have running water? Do you have hot water? Does your toilet flush? Do your doors lock? Do you have a operable, smoke detector? Things like that. Because you don't want to be using STRMU.
In a place where they can't do anything.
Part of that legal right? If code enforcement shut it down and you're not allowed to legally live there, then
Yeah.
STRMU should be.
A lead-based paint visual assessment is required for STRMU, but only under specific conditions. So if the assistance is going to last more than 100 consecutive days and the housing was built before 1978 and the household has members who are pregnant or children under the age of 6 residing in the unit, then you need to do a visual inspection. So if STRMU is lasting less than 100 days, you don't need to do a lead-based paint visual inspection. It's the 100 days consecutive usage that is the first trigger and the only trigger for STRMU. So how do you avoid STRMU hotspots? You develop comprehensive STRMU applications to make sure you're including all the required eligibility criteria with also reminders for documentation or the types of documentation you want to see in a client file. So you're going to want to know household family size, right? Because you can't determine area median income unless you know the size of the family, because AMI is based on size of the family. You need to demonstrate need for assistance and make sure you have backup documentation supporting that. Make sure you ask some questions about what is their total rent amount, and if it is a rental request, what portion do you pay, right? Because the whole portion question will get to whether they might have another form of rental assistance. Ask questions about mortgage, utility, household share. And this gets to other types of assistance, whether another state, local, federal program helps with those costs. Develop a housing care plan to document short-term, homeless prevention efforts for use for STRMU and long-term goals. Have some questions about the unit condition, definitely, and have a document checklist. I can't quite see that, but I think it says, complete an approved STRMU application with the accompanying documentation, which should tell the story from the time they came in to the time you reviewed it and the time you approved it, that it's an eligible cost and the household met all STRMU eligibility. It's literally a story.
So when monitoring comes in and monitors that client's STRMU, there should be everything stapled together, beginning to end. They shouldn't have to dig through a file and pull through things. They want it all together. Any other STRMU questions?
Your turn.
Oh. So familiar slide from the first day. So the move-in cost, right? So separate from TVRA, separate from STRMU, are these costs that clients might need to move into a unit. So PHP can only, permanent housing placement, PHP, can only be used to establish new tenancy or residency where continued occupancy is expected. Right, so we talked a little bit about that, right? That, you know, you just can't be a client saying like, I'm going to move into a unit, I'm never going to pay rent, and then I'm just going to move on to somewhere else. But what this means, though, is that regardless of their current housing status, whether they're housed or homeless, anyone can access PHP. That continued occupancy is often evidenced by a lease, but that's not a requirement. If you don't have a lease, have some sort of form of backup documentation. Listen, whatever that is to make sure that's in the file, that they have continued occupancy. So we're going to go over the eligible costs like we did the first day on the next couple of slides. You will see here, once again, about staff salary fringe, but sort of to keep hammering this idea home that PHP eligible costs are only eligible under PHP. Because sometimes where programs get into trouble is that there's some old guidance out there that talks about PHP being a form of supportive services, and programs think that they can then pay these things under support services. And that wasn't the intention of that, because these are separate activities. It's just saying basically PHP is another wraparound service to make sure someone maintains their housing. Right, so we'll see programs say like, oh, I ran out of my PHP budget line item, so I started paying security deposits under support services. Not an eligible cost. Have to go to PHP. So application fees and all of these we went over. So the one-time utility connection fees, right? So assuming there's not even a past due bill, right? Just that cost of transferring it over. Or we've seen instances where someone has been so behind on the utilities all the time that they can transfer their account over, but the utility company wants a chunk of money as a deposit.
Right.
Right. So absolutely you can. We talked about the security deposits. We'll go into that and how it ties into program income here in a few slides. First and last month's rent for people not receiving subsidies, because that's a duplication of benefits if they do have a subsidy, because that subsidy should be covering that. Your question, Sarah, the rent or utility arrears when past rent or utilities is documented as a barrier to obtaining new housing. Right, so that's that key, is it's not just I owe a previous landlord money or I owe a utility company money when I lived in a different unit. It's now I've also then contacted the utility company. I can't get the utilities in my name because of it, so I can't move in. Or I have no landlord references besides this one, and if I don't pay that past due money, I can't get housed. So it's that additional step of making sure you're documented that it's a barrier. Those other fees, as long as they're legal, mediation service, and we went over that rent insurance as well on the first day. But once again, it's just that initial payment, whatever length of term that first payment is perfectly fine. But there is no other HOPWA funds that can pay renter's insurance after that initial payment. So some hot spots, eligibility, right? So sometimes you could have a client literally coming in just for an application fee. And let's say in Maine it was $30 to think through, like, you know, whatever, right? I can definitely help you with that application fee, $30. And then I have to stop myself and say, you're not part of our program. Who lives with you? I need some information. What's their income? Yeah. So and the further we go down these activities is where this becomes a bigger issue, because programs are almost always good at TVRA, most of the time STRMU, but when we go through these like low dollar amounts, application fees, food assistance, right? That's where programs just start thinking like, oh, Heather's here, I'll grab her income, and then they forget everything else. We talked about paying these costs under other HOPWA activities. The hotspot of proof of continued occupancy. This is also one of those things that's easy for you to know it exists in your head and you never convert it to a file, whether that's something they gave you or a note to file or a phone call you made in a case note, but it never leaves here into here that someone could see it monitoring. So making sure that's in there. Are you guys still excited to see duplication of benefits pop up every so often? We talked about the ineligible costs, the cost for a moving company, van or truck. A PHP can't pay for that. The guidance on security deposits. Once again, no more than 2 months total rent. Otherwise, there's no federal guidance that caps other types of PHP assistance. So what that means is you could potentially offer as many security or as many application fees as you want. You can pay multiple security deposits, not on the same unit, right? But there's no stopping you from paying a security deposit in one unit and the client needs to move a year later and you pay another, and the client moves a year later and you pay another. So you'd want policies and procedures that start to outline what any internal limits are on assistance, right? Because it might make sense to say we won't pay more than one security deposit a year for clients that every month want to move to a new unit, and to help slow that down, or at least to not help them in that insane plan, to say, oh, you can move as many times as you want. We're only paying a security deposit once. So how are you going to pay for that? Right, so those are the things that, particularly to control your budget, to be fair and equitable to as many clients as possible, have internal policies. So when a client said, I attended a TA webinar I saw on the Hot Exchange the other day, and Heather Rhoda from Cloudburst said, you could say that is correct. And our policies beyond that say this. So that's why we can't help you on your 26 security deposit in 12 months, because we cap it at 25. I'm so sorry. So neither habitability or HQS apply to PHP, nor does lead-based paint visual assessments. So the same idea, you want to make sure it's generally safe and livable and habitable, but particularly to stress this because there's still some guidance floating out there that at some point people thought the Office of HIV Housing was going to require this, that you had to do an inspection for a security deposit. Yeah. Well, they were thinking about it, right? They were thinking about it, but it never rolled out to that.
Yeah, they changed their mind.
So this is not a requirement. So the same way for STRMU, a good application is going to ask some questions about where you're moving into, right? What does that look like? Toilets flush, they're gaping holes through the wall, things like that. But there's not this administrative burden for you to get in your car and drive 3 hours to walk through for, I said, a client might come in only for a security deposit, and then they're going to exit themselves and you'll never hear from them again.
So we only have to do the inspections for TBR.
Right. And if you have like transitional housing, facility-based housing, that's leasing, right? Yep. That's correct. So it's not the use of PHP that triggers the inspection, it's the use of TBRA that does.
Or isn't it STRMU 100 days?
That's lead-based
Paint visual, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you went in, say you did a lead-based paint visual assessment in person, and you're not doing inspection, but you know a lot of other problematic things, that would be separate. But say you do HQS, and even for that lead-based paint for STRMU, that doesn't mean you're going in to do HQS. You're just checking the paint. So if you are doing, imagine the time you can save yourself by not having to
Well,
drive.
I mean, we've been on the labor the whole time anyway, so I was just take pictures and send it to me.
So you don't even need to do that with PHP.
And it's not a bad part, particularly if it's pictures, but it's just thinking through your time to make sure you can get your case notes done, so billing can get done, so you can get home to your family at a decent time Friday afternoon, and say, I'm not driving 2 hours for a HQS inspection for a security deposit. Send me a couple pictures. Let's answer a few questions.
Also too, you can use a security deposit with other rental assistance programs. So if you have a client who's transferring or moving onto a housing choice voucher program, and they need a security deposit to secure a unit, you could, and they're still eligible for HOPWA, you can use HOPWA for the security deposit. And you move on to the Section 8 voucher program, the HCD program.
Can you, okay, say that they're moving in, but they have to pay first month's rent and like prorated rent and deposit, you can only do deposit.
Right.
So what we talked about,
First
that
month's rent would be their prorated portion and the HCD portion.
so in some instances, what you'd want to do if a landlord says, I want security deposit of first month's rent or security deposit equal to 1 month's rent, first month's rent and last month, is you can't pay first or last month's rent, but what you could do is say, I'll give you a security deposit equal to 2 months' rent. And then the subsidy is going to cover first month's. Then whatever that landlord classifies it in his head or in his system is totally up to him. Because in theory, that last month's rent would come back because the client and both the program are going to pay their share. So that's it. It's still sort of a form of security deposit. That's where you want to make sure that I'm paying a security deposit equal to 2 months' rent. I'm not paying 1 month security and last month. Sort of reclassify those costs. Now, the unexciting thing about security deposits is unlike some federal programs, security deposits, even once paid, remain the property of the HOPWA program. So they're not grants that you just pay it out and forget about it. So that means your program, your agency has to have a way to track those security deposits. So that if a tenant moves out or disappears, you have to do your due diligence to try to get any remaining funds back to you. And if funds do come back in those rare circumstances, they become program income, right? Which means they can only be used for HOPWA eligible expenses. So if you do get money back, right, then your finance person should have something internal to track that. To say, we got $500 back, and here's what we're going to spend it on, because that's also then important for the grantee, because what you're seeking for reimbursement, they're going to have a policy for how you apply program income, right? Either you reduce it from your reimbursement request, you send it back to them, whatever that is. Yeah.
What if those deposits travel in like grant things, like if it's the year before, like how does the fact that come back from next?
You're just tracking. So how program income gets applied doesn't necessarily tie to the contractor allocation, right? So it doesn't matter if you paid it 2 years ago, it would come back and you'd apply it to whatever. So let's assume, without going too far down the 200 200 rabbit hole, right? Assuming that you apply program income by reducing your reimbursement, you would just apply it to that recent reimbursement. It came back in December 2022, right? You would subtract $500 from that.
But you would just work with the grantee about what they wanted to do with it. Yeah, so I'll just reach out and say, no, what do you want me to do?
I've got one bag.
Yeah, it's not counted.
Yes. I mean, because normally if they're leaving, it's not on the.
But part of this is due diligence. So when we would send out security deposits, we'd include a letter to the landlord saying, asterisk, this is our money. So if the client moves, you cannot give it to them. And we'd also say, we need documentation of where the money went. Because at least for Maine state law, the only way a landlord could keep a security deposit if they provided proof to the tenant of where that money went. So we said, so we're the one who paid it. So you send that proof to us. If we find out that you kept the money, didn't send it, we're going to request the full amount back. At least in Maine, if they can't prove it went to you, you get your money back plus damages. So we'd say not only that, we can get more than our security deposit back. So, and if landlords ignored us and then we tried to follow up, due diligence, but at least we made it very clear and that was in the file. So just make sure that's all part of your program design. So there are programs that once you pay the security deposit, the program no longer cares. If you happen to get it back, great. So this should look familiar based upon the STRMU, but having a comprehensive PHP application or something that looks similar to include all required eligibility criteria, household family size, composition, and income for all those persons, questions about the unit, and documentation checklist, right? So once again, that you have some sort of PHP application or intake that tells the entire story. So when monitoring comes or HUD comes to monitor, you have the entire story in one packet and they're not picking through trying to look for pieces that may or may not be there. And then the only additional one here is making sure your agency has an internal tracking tool to document all security deposits paid with HOPWA, right? So if the state asks or HUD asks to say, we see you're funded for PHP, did you pay any security deposits? Someone can quickly bring up something and say, yes, here's when we paid it. And so at least you can show you're doing your due diligence. Nothing surprising there.
No.
Any questions? STRMU, PHP? Great.
Okay, if you guys want to take a quick break, we'll keep hammering on and do session 6. I haven't seen Jay. He had a session, but okay. Yeah, he had me change it just a bit, shift it. I haven't had anything yet. But if for whatever reason he can't do his presentation, go and take the slide packet and I'll see if Jay can record it and I'll send it out to everyone because yeah. Yeah, and we can do like maybe if there's any general questions that HOPWA has about Ryan White, maybe we can fill that in.
You guys met your like Ryan White counterpart via region. So that's a good start.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of the activities over there. One thing I will say about the rest of the scenarios, I got to thinking, I was like, it's a good experience we had, kind of like doing some shifting, some conversations, getting you guys together. But I thought maybe something that might be a little beneficial for those who haven't experienced a cluster yet is maybe have like Cassie and Summer come up and Kay, and then maybe Marissa and Craig, and they can talk just a little bit about their experiences with the clusters. It might be a little, I think it'd be more beneficial than the last two. And I won't make you share your presentations, but it was more so just to get you thinking and working together, just to kind of prepare, because we really don't know. And I've done a presentation with you all. Yeah, we did our one at the housing conference and kind of tied the clusters into it. So I thought that'd be beneficial. But go in, get up, stretch your legs, take about 15 minutes, and then we'll head back into session 6, answer some Ryan Wright questions, then we'll have just a brief discussion about how the clusters have been. And guys, online, we're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back at it.